Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Cast Ice, the podcast that explores the great big wild world of tabletop gaming that exists today. It's been said once or twice, mainly on this podcast, that we are in the middle of a gaming renaissance. There are just too many good games that we can spend our hobby time and our hobby dollars on, and it can lead to a serious case of not knowing what to play next. And that's the purpose of this podcast. It's to talk about the games that my guests and I enjoy playing. It's to talk about big industry events and to talk to the people who create these games. Now, I know the last couple of weeks we have not been talking bolt action. And I know that I've been getting some messages saying, where's the bolt action? Well, it is coming. In fact, it's coming right now. And one of the things that we often see when people come into bolt action or with bolt action events is events that play around 1,000 points. That's the recommended point value for the game. I mean, that's what a lot of people play at. But sometimes people like to play with the toys, and so they like to go a little bit bigger. 1250, for example, is another very common point value of game that people play. Now, there are lots of tournament organizers and event coordinators over the years in many different countries across the world who have played with that number. And obviously, you can always go bigger, but not always seen in bolt action in particular is what happens when you go smaller. Now, we've run a few smaller events here in Melbourne over the years, and so I'll have a little bit to add to this conversation. But recently, in other parts of Australia, we have had two excellent events, one with 24 players and one with 32 players that got significantly lower than 1,000 points. Joining me today are the gentlemen who ran those events and one of the guys who played in it. And I think it is without further ado that we introduce our guests. Of course, we have Craig, who was the recent TO of the Codswallop 2022 event. And we have Adrian, who was not only a player at Codswallop, but was one of the two TOs for Moab. Gentlemen, welcome to Cast Ice.
Thank you so much for having us, Brad. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. It's great to join you.
It's great having you guys.
Actually,
now,
at this
Craig,
point,
I have 1,000.
Long time. I was going to say at this point, I feel like on a radio program that I should be saying long time listener, first time caller.
I'm just glad you listened. Thank you very much. It always I always get a little blushy when that happens. Let's jump to Craig. I have 1,000 questions about Codswallop. In fact, we're going to talk at length about it. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about Moab. Now, earlier this year, Moab ran, and that is a big Sydney event. And I was hoping to go this year, and unfortunately, life got in the way, and I wasn't able to make it. Although I bought the army, and it's sitting right behind me. Adrian, you were one of the two tournament organizers for Moab, and Moab has a long and storied bolt action history. I know my history with it is rather significant as well because I went many times, and the very first time I went, I ran into my Ghost Army podcast co-hosts, Patch and Brian Cook. And had I not been at Moab, the Ghost Army podcast probably wouldn't happen today. What was it like? I know that coming out of COVID lockdowns, events across Australia were, we had to build things back up. Moab being one of the big shows and you being one of the TOs for it, what was that like, that process of sort of re-engaging Moab and getting the wheel turning again? And what was the event like for you this year?
Well, look, we were expecting to have a bit of an open slather as far as numbers were concerned. But the issue with the numbers in the end turned out to be about a whole lot of stuff, weightlifting equipment that they'd stored in the facilities, and basically they hadn't moved it off yet. So there was a whole lot of rooms that weren't available. So early on in the piece, we were like talking about only having maybe 18 people at the most. And I think when word got out for that, a lot of people went, oh, maybe I won't go, or maybe I'll do something else. So we, I think, we ended up being offered a lot more spots. I think 24 We had one table in an outside room, so we were pretty much at maximum. But Moab's like the big Sydney event. Well, it used to be until Codswallop. But
spoilers.
yeah. But I would have expected maybe a few more, but they never turned up. So it was but it was a good event. I had a great time. It's the first time I've TO'd, and to be perfectly honest with you, I had such a fun time. It was such a good bunch of people. It was just I can't speak highly enough of everybody that went. It was so much fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and you guys did something. And you guys did something that a lot of other events in Australia don't usually do, and we see more in overseas events, which was you guys ran an event that allowed tank platoons. We don't often see that down here, but to balance it, quote unquote, you guys also ran a smaller point value. You're running 900 points.
Yeah, that was the idea behind the point value. So if you ran 250 points, easy to get 3 big Shermans, and we didn't want that. We didn't want to have that kind of tank platoons. I was thinking, CB33s, FT17s, all the crappy stuff. And that's pretty much what we got in the end. We got a lot of tank platoons that were small little tanks that just ran around the board, everybody having a lot of fun. We also had a little bit of cavalry, which I think is probably the most ideal infantry to run with a tank platoon, because you're not paying for transport. But it was lower points. One of the other things that we had as well, besides tank platoons, is that we didn't have any restriction on flamethrowers. So if you could get as many flamethrowers as you wanted in your list, we allowed that. But having said that, everybody pretty much had one. Some people didn't, but everybody pretty much had one, and there was only one list with 2 flamethrowers. So one of the things that we made clear on that as well is that a lot of people play flamethrowers point blank at 6 inches. And we made it clear that those modifiers stack. So anything over 3 inches is long range for flamethrower, and that's a stacked modifier. So long range, point blank, moved, you're hitting on forwards. So you got a 50% chance. So it's a much different sort of calculation compared to hitting on 3s. So, unfortunately, I can't tell you how having a lot of flamethrowers goes, because nobody turned up with them, and they certainly didn't win. But actually, the 2 flamethrowers, I think one was a man pack and one was Stuart, he was playing on the top table. He didn't win, but yeah, it was good. One of the takeaways that Ian gave me was that the top 4 tables were tank platoons. So we're not 100% sure whether it was a great format in that sense. I don't know how otherwise you'd get all those little tanks in there, though. So but having said that, those players on those top tables, they're really experienced players. They know how to build a list. Given the opportunity to run tank platoon, they'll run tank platoon. You give me an opportunity to run a tank platoon, 600 points. I run a tank platoon. I like the mechanics. I like the way it works. And another thing that we did with Moab was we also let people know when people were sending their lists in. I told everybody there will be tank platoons. You can have as many flamethrowers as you want. Make sure everybody's on the same page. I didn't get many list changes. Most people were pretty happy with taking what they'd thought up in the first place. But the takeaway at 900 points was they're fast, fun games.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I'll be honest. The list I was going to turn in, and I think I even ran by you guys, was a tank platoon. So go figure.
Yeah. One of the other things with tank platoons, and we did try and sort of hamstring them a little bit. So we had a lot of objective-based games. We had more objective-based games, and tanks weren't even allowed to contest. So you had to have infantry to contest or to win the objective. We had a lot of terrain on the boards. So there wasn't these massive line of sights. We had city tables. I mean, the table that I took was a very dense city table. So, move, turn, you're going to get stuck down the street. You make one wrong move with your tanks, you're buggered.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think Ian played my CV-33 platoon in that, and he crushed his opponent, unfortunately. That was the buy.
Now, Ian was your TO, and he's run many events like Tank Busters and other things, correct?
Yes. Yep. He's very experienced. Fantastic TO. Fantastic guy. It's a pity he can't be on here tonight, but hey, you've got me instead. So
exactly. And spoilers, you're actually. Oops, sorry. You're actually not here to talk about Moab at all. You're here to talk about something else entirely. And I'll take that as the segue that it is, boys and girls, and jump to Codswallop 2022. Craig, can you give us the rundown, just a ballpark? What is Codswallop? And because it's a hell of a name, but this isn't the first year this event is run.
No, we've been running this for 3 years. We ran it all through COVID, and that was a real challenge to try and put a tournament together during the COVID years. But our club was, and just give a plug for our club. It's Western Front Gamers. We operate out of West Ryde in Sydney, and at that club, we've really tried to. We wanted to put an event on that was still keeping things ticking over during those difficult years of COVID. And so when lockdowns weren't on, but we were able to operate with some restrictions, we still managed to get 20-odd players adequately spaced, wearing masks with hand sanitizer, all those kinds of things, but still being able to play games. And that was a key thing that we wanted to try and do during that. But the original genesis of Codswallop is I'd gone to Moab, I'd been to CanCon, and I was kind of getting a little stale, and I haven't been playing bolt action forever, and honestly, I'm probably not a very good player. But at the end of the day, I was kind of getting a little stale with the same old cookie cutter format of things. And so every year when we've run it, we've tried to do something a little bit different with the themes. So 1 year we had weather effects in play. So it might have been a game where there was fog and mist in play. And so, or being, I think actually the first year it might have been, that's what it was. We had dawn. So the first games were being played with sun coming up. The last game was being played with the sun going down. And the middle game was played middle of the day. And we just tried to do something a bit different, using some of those optional rules to try and give it a bit of flavour, and also to encourage players, I guess, to think a little bit differently in their games. Last year, we switched to weather effects. So we switched to fog and mist, and if it was in the desert board, it would have been sandstorm or something like that blowing up, and a couple of those kinds of things, just to try and get people to think differently about their games. Last year also, I ran it with all objective-based games. So I part of the entry fee for people to join last year, got them a set of 5 objectives with the Codswallop logo on there, and we gave those to everyone, and every game involved objectives.
That's awesome. I love it. Yeah. I love it. Well, let's talk about one of the reasons why you're here, obviously, besides talking about Codswallop, is, wait, how many points was this event? Codswallop was the smallest point value bolt action event that I know of off the top of my head. And it was, you were allowed to bring one list, not 2 platoons, 1 platoon of 489 points. And as someone who just ran an event with 911 points, I think that's fantastic. Now that is cool. Why pick 489 other than just to make people, think real hard about what they were taking?
Well, yeah, I guess we were umming and ahhing for a little while as to what to do here. My initial thought was around 750 points.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been listening to the guys from the US, the Snafu podcast, and they talk about their Recon Rumble they play, and it's usually around that sort of 700. And I thought I like the feel and the sound of that. And so what we decided to do, though, in the end, after sort of a bit of throwing the ideas around amongst a few people, we came down to closer to 500 points, and then ended up landing on 489 because it just happened to be the number of Tiger 2s that were produced.
I love it.
That's why it was. That was the only reason we chose that number. Was the book, the Armies of Germany book, says 489 Tiger 2s, and I've got a feeling that might have even been Adrian's suggestion when I threw the ideas around. Was that number being, I said I'm thinking around this 500, and I was bouncing the ideas off a few folks. And 489 got raised as being that. I thought, bingo, that works happily. And it was interesting sort of thinking about that sort of low points value. So the previous years we'd gone with 1,000 points, was the first year. The second year was 1,030 points. The reason I put the 30 on was we made it mandatory to bring either a chaplain, a medic, or an intelligence officer. So you had to have one in your list. This year we decided to switch it up, and instead of having weather effects and things in play, make it that smaller list. And the thinking was that we wanted to try and make it available to as many players as possible. Because if you just bought a starter set, you've got enough probably for a 489 point list.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the thinking there. If you've all you've bought is the Band of Brothers set, and you might have picked it up off eBay or from Warlord if they were still selling it at that point, then that'd be more than enough for you to put a 500 point list together. So that was kind of the thinking there. We put a few other things in place to try and change the thinking. I can see them on the list there, like all the standard stuff about no tank platoons. I mean, 489 points probably wasn't going to be enough to put a tank platoon together, although I'm sure Adrian would have found a way.
Mm-hmm.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
3,000.
Yeah, there we go. So, and we decided in the end, I guess just a couple of restrictions in there, but I guess some of the key things was around the no free units. At that level of game, it was really going to unbalance it, that if all of a sudden someone gets a free squad of soldiers in their Indian army or their Soviet army, or if
extra dice would have made a big difference. I think, what was the highest dice count? 9 dice?
The highest dice count was 9.
And the average was what, 7?
Average was 7, lowest was 5.
Yeah.
So, and I guess that was the thinking, was to try and break the mold a little bit of what people bring. You still had to bring your standard, officer and a couple of squads, but we didn't we didn't force people just to stick to generic reinforced platoons. And that's been something that I found frustrating for myself. There's a lot of really good units out there and good lists out there in the various campaign books, but you go to an event and most people say, oh no, it's got to be generic reinforced platoon. And I was frustrated as a British airborne player that I always wanted to take this cool list with lots of jeeps or something different, and it's that's not a generic reinforced platoon. And so that's what sort of allowed me to say to people, well, I think they should be allowed to bring theatre selectors, but I reserve the right to say, not that one. If you submit it to me, I'll look at it, judge it on its value, but by and large, I didn't want to say no to people, was the thinking.
Now, you also put in there a rule that I know some people overseas will find interesting, that is that officers must have an experience level of at least half of their platoon. So you can't run the all-veteran platoon with the inexperienced officer in your event. Yeah,
and that was exactly what we were trying to avoid. I didn't want people to be all gamey about the low points value, try and squeeze in the cheese. And there was a couple of people that missed that rule initially on their submissions, and we had to go back and just say, hey, you missed the thing about the experience. I'm a historian, probably more than I am, and I'm not much of a historian either, but I am a gamer. I love reading the history and things, and so for me, I don't like the idea of, I've got this one platoon of guys, and there's a bunch of Maoris, and there's a bunch of South Africans, and there's a bunch of Australians, there's a bunch of this, and they're all together under an inexperienced officer, and it's a bit too gamey. And I didn't come from that background of the other games that are out there that are super gamey, and it's all about sort of building a perfectly min-maxed list. That's not my background in wargaming at all. So I wanted to try and force people to be a bit more thoughtful about what they brought.
Yeah. Now, you also said no vehicles vehicles can only have a maximum armor of 8+.
Correct.
So even like your Shermans wouldn't be allowed for this event. Medium tanks were out. And you have the rule that I believe originally comes from the Jugger pack, but is also being used at CanCon this year, which is that MMG teams provide suppressive fire, as in they score one automatic pin when they're firing on a non-armored vehicle, and then they do an additional pin should they succeed in actually hitting them. Those are both, again, pretty big changes as far as what people can bring and how they operate on the table. Any particular reason you chose, though, other than what I've said?
So the MMG rule, absolutely. We wanted to. My feeling is that MMGs are not priced right for what they do in the current version of the game, and I think that's a commonly held view that they aren't great value for what you get. I could for the same price, I could put a twin MMG on a recce Jeep, and I'd be more than happy with that. So we wanted to put some value, and we wanted to try and reflect that a little bit in what the MMGs were doing. So that was the first thought in putting that together. Last year, I tried out the D3 pins on MMGs, and we go there, and that seemed to be reasonably well accepted. We wanted to try something different this year and see how that Jugger rule went. On the vehicles, it was really about saying to people, if things aren't 8+, I don't need to be loading up with Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks and too much anti-tank. And it would encourage, hopefully, people to bring some tanks that weren't usually seen, or some vehicles that weren't usually seen. And we did get to see a bit of that. Adrian had a little Polish tank, which was very cute. It was about the size of not much bigger than my thumb.
They are tiny. TK tank with the 20mm autocannon on it, and then the Vickers with the twin turret MMGs, and it was great. I love running those two vehicles. The Vickers got destroyed once, and the TK got disabled once, and that was it. So it was a lot of fun having those vehicles. I mean, when I saw the points value, my first thought was howitzer Sherman. Well, obviously, I saw the 8+ armor, so I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So and look, I think there was one good thing about that, which at CanCon they're having the open top pinning rules. I think if Craig had done that, we would have seen a lot of open top heavy howitzers and that kind of thing. And I think it was didn't. Because, I mean, it's infantry, right? And you get something like that, it's just going to be munting infantry. Some people are going to have a bad day. The Codswallop, I think, is probably this year, I think, was the most user-friendly event that I've ever been to. It was, he's been talking about, not being a gamey gamer, and he always talks about wanting to have an event where everybody's going to have fun and new players can come. Everybody talks about wanting new players to come along and do it. And there's a really fine balance between having competitive players come and play the event and people who aren't so competitive coming and playing the event. And this points value in the pack that they put together, I think just really hit that balance really, really well. Because honestly, it was anybody's day, wasn't it? Until the very last.
the top 3 players all ended on 3 wins and a draw. So it was 4 games, 90 minutes each, and the top 3 players were all 3 wins and a draw. The difference was how well they won their games when they won them. And Adrian came out on top there. But we saw some really interesting and open games that really, I mean, at the end of the day, there were 4 players that all could have won the game, all could have won the tournament. And that was what you wanted after 4 games. There's 2 tables running. Who's going to win this? Who knows? How it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exciting. When you see that happening. And we even saw some people that we've had one guy turn up to our tournaments. Big shout out to Alex if he's listening. Alex is a guy that's been to Codswallop for 3 years now. The previous 2 years he hadn't won a game. He's been playing for about 3 years. I think 3-4 years he's been at our club. And he loves playing. He's so passionate about getting in and playing. And he got in. He got a draw. He got a win. And he got a special prize. And we'll talk a bit about prizes later. But he went home a happy man. He came running over to me when he got his first win and was like, "Craig, I won. And it was honestly the best thing ever of the day was awesome. Seeing him so excited that he'd won a game. And that's what it's all about. We wanted to see people turn up. I mean, I think, honestly, the best 3 players on the day were probably there in that top 3. That's what it's all about. But everyone else was competitive. It was very close across the tables.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you want.
That is what you want. Well, you did something else really interesting with list submissions. You said that players must indicate what year and theater your force is representing. You required people do some historical background for their forces, which I know is going to make some people twitch overseas.
Yeah.
However, I think that's fantastic. How did that play out as far as at the event? You saw the lists that were coming in. You had 32 players. So there were 32 lists that came in. I know that some people will probably have gone down historical rabbit holes and made that, a really a big theme of their force, and other people would have probably done the old high school book report version and written a couple sentences and stuck it on the front. But still, you don't see that too often in an event. How did that quote unquote restriction go down?
It's interesting. It is actually a restriction I'd put in the year before, and the year before it was really well taken on. Everyone really got into it, and people were submitting like mini essays. Which was fantastic. And one of the prizes we gave last year was actually for the best themed force. So we actually just, it was up to myself and Paul, who was the other TO last year, to judge on which one we thought was the best themed, historical theme that went in there. This year I left it in there, and the thinking was initially that I wanted to award an early war, mid-war, late war kind of along those lines. And you'll see that coming up in the players pack when we get to that discussion. It didn't quite work out that way because at 489 points, there wasn't a lot of differentiation because the big cats weren't at play. All the special toys. Yeah, at 489 points, you've got to think really hard about the way that you start to incorporate those assault rifles or Panzerfausts or Panzerschrecks and things. And do you actually need them? And so we ended up changing it out. Having said that, though, you're exactly right. We got some people that was mine is a list about late war invasion in Normandy. Great, a couple of those. There were a couple of people that really went down the rabbit hole and showed up some really great historical thinking around what they had, which was fantastic. There was a guy that actually he came last year. He actually themed up a list last year around his grandfather's force, and he told us all a story. And then he turned up again this year. He didn't win the themed event last year, but this year he turned up again because last year he forgot to bring a little prop with him, and he actually brought it with him this year. Adrian, I don't know whether you saw it. A guy called Craig, he brought along.
Talking about though.
You did see it?
No, I didn't, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, he brought along a wallet. His grandfather was in I think he was in Tunisia, fighting with the British, and he got shot in the chest. But he had a little wallet that he was carrying in his chest pocket, which had some coins in it. And in that wallet was found embedded, the bullet, the round that went against the coins and bent the coins. And so he actually brought the wallet along with the hole in it, with the coins, and with the flattened out round, which was really special to see. So some people really love that history stuff. And I mean, like I said before, I'm a historian, so that stuff's just awesome. He was showing that very proudly off to people all day. So I love it when people start to think really carefully about what they're actually putting together. And so this is all about trying to create a bit of a mindset of, I can't just throw together anything that just fits so that I can get fit points in, but I can actually have to think a little bit more about what was in that force around that time. Honestly, I was never going to audit it and say, oh, you can't bring that because they didn't have those then. But it's about trying to get that thinking.
Well, you also had another addendum to the player pack that leans into that, which I thought was awesome. And I know our buddy Dan from Valhalla Games was running the list that you were talking about earlier with the British paratroopers at Moab in all the Jeeps. And it was in that he had a German autocannon half track that they had commandeered on the day. Now, for this event, you said historically themed substitutions of equivalent or identical stats may be arranged in advance with the TO for pre-approval. Of course, this, and again, this isn't to cheese out your list. This is to help lean into a particular list. Did many people take you up on that? Because that is something you don't see every day, and it's awesome when it's done right.
Yeah, no one really took it up this year. Sorry, Adrian?
Not enough points.
No.
Yeah, true.
That's right. It made it a bit narrow. So no one really took that up this year. I'm all for just trying to get them to put those things out there. I want to see cool things on the table. I want to see you try things. The interesting other thing with the years and trying to get people to think about the theme is it allowed me to try and make the first round a little bit historical. So I tried where possible to historically match opponents and to then also put them on a table that matched, if I was able to, their theme on that day. So the photo we're looking at there is actually from last year. It was a submarine dock, this table. And playing on that, for example, was like considered to be like a late war German list against I think it's an American platoon that came in there. So it was, we tried to pick them on something that might have looked like the kind of terrain that they might have. I mean, these things are always substitutes, but that was the aim, was to try and make it a little bit easier for arranging the first round so that you were going to get historical matchups. Not always possible, because when, for example, I only got one Soviet list in the whole thing, and there was a whole bunch of people with Eastern Front armies. But what can you do?
With that point level, I would have thought Soviets would have been everywhere.
I was very surprised that only one Soviet list. And I've got to say, it was a very, very cool list too. I want to call out to the person who put this one together. This is the player's name was Eleanor. That's right. We had a lady playing at our thing, which was awesome. She came along. She fielded a Soviet list that was all women.
Oh, nice. Using why can't I think of the name of the manufacturer all of a sudden?
I can't think of it either.
Oh, I'm going to kick myself. She does such wonderful work out of the UK. Annie? No. Ooh. Anyway, we'll talk.
Yeah, the company's name either.
What is it?
I can't remember it either. I think we're all having a brain.
Bad Squiddo?
Bad Squiddo. That's it.
Yes. Yeah, there we go. That's good. She does awesome models. I was looking through her Soviet range, seeing if I could get some Soviet sailors to add to my existing Soviet sailor force. And no, they didn't have, at least she doesn't make the models for Soviet sailor women. But I will need to look that up. Let's talk prizes.
So I was going to say, that was Eleanor's first tournament. And if you come to CanCon, I was going to say, that was Eleanor's first tournament, her first painted bolt action army. And if you come to CanCon, I'm fairly sure it's going to make an appearance there.
Brilliant. Oh, man, I love a good theme. And that is a cool theme. And to be the only Soviet army, that's amazing. Mother Russia. Well, let's talk about prizes. We have mentioned a couple of times that there were prizes for this. Talk us through, my man.
Yeah, so this is what I put in the players pack. And this is one of those things that it's really difficult. people ask what prizes you're going to give, and I put something in the players pack, and then we ended up changing because in the end, the early war, late war general thing didn't really work out, and so that ended up getting canned. We went with a best painted force, so we changed that from best painted to we do call it Hannah Swag as gets called, but we just said to people, we made it an open vote from all the players to vote on which army was the coolest. You might think cool is by theme. You might think cool is it's unique. You might think cool in the fact that hey, that's an outstanding paint job and a brilliant display board. And so that was one of the prizes that got put out there. Then we basically did our first, second, third, and of course our wooden spoon. We had to have a wooden spooner. But at the same time, everyone went home with something. And I think this is one of the key things that we wanted to have inside Codswallop is for your $30 entry fee, you were going to go home with a decent prize. You were going to go home having played 4 games of bolt action and in a good, friendly environment. And that's one of the things we really tried to emphasize there. There's no win at all costs mindset. It's a good, friendly environment.
Nice.
And the third thing was that we wanted people to go home having had a meal. So that was sort of for their thing. So that everyone got something out of it in terms of feed and a prize. We had our first, second, and third, and Warlord Games got behind this event. This was a Warlord Games sponsored event. As such, we had for the first, second, and third prize winners, we had the silver order dice, which the 3 people that went home with them, I might as well run through them. Adrian, of course, winning. So he's got his silver order dice. Aaron Russell, you might know him. I think he took out CanCon last year from this year.
He did. Gold dice from CanCon, from Moab.
Yeah. He's getting collecting the full set. I was saying he's collecting the full set. He's got the gold ones and the silver ones now. So, and Aaron's a great player. And the last person, third place, was Isaac, who was my son. Isaac
awesome.
Yeah, so he's been plugging away for a number of years. He took out Tank Busters earlier in the year, and he's been on the rise, and he's super keen. So he will also be at CanCon this year. And his list was interesting in that we're heading down a rabbit hole here, but his list was interesting in that it brought is it a Wasp? Yeah, a Wasp, the universal carrier with the flamethrower at 489 points. So it made an interesting little foe out there and attracted a lot of attention. So,
yeah, man, those are the things you just can't let live sometimes. Got to let it go.
Absolutely. I got to say, in some practice games with him, I played we were trying out some of the scenarios and different pieces to see how it sort of hung together. And that thing just drove me nuts. Yeah.
The thing that a lot of people forget with that thing is how small it is, and you can really get behind. It's like your Polish tankette or my Japanese tankettes. You can literally hide the Type 94 Japanese tankette behind a set of stairs on a board. It is so small that you could almost hide it behind a phone pole. And to have the universal carrier, it's a little bit bigger, but not that much bigger. So you can really hide that thing where you want, and then, it can zip out. Being a tracked vehicle, you can drive over rough terrain. Keeping that thing away from your lines, given its size and given its profile and given its capabilities of driving over things, it can be a real headache.
Yeah, and he had a pintle-mounted machine gun on it as well, so had it loaded up with troops and driving around, giving everyone a bit of trouble. So. Yeah. The other thing that we gave away, went back on prizes again, sorry. The other thing that we gave away was with Warlord's sponsorship, they also gave us a copy of Combined Arms, the new, what do you call it, board game, war game that it is. And we decided with this, instead of, and this was after some conversation with some guys in Canberra about this, we decided to try and think a bit differently about the way we gave away the big prize for the day. And so instead of it being the person who wins the game, wins the tournament, gets to come up first, and they feel almost compelled to take the biggest thing on the table, we decided that with combined arms, we would do a dice-off. And so we got all 32 players lined up down the hall, facing off against their round 2 opponent. And they had one roll of the dice to beat each other. Any ties got replayed. Down to 16 players, down to 8 players, down to 4, final 2. And the cool thing was that Alex, that we spoke about earlier, he not only won his first game, but he went home with a copy of Combined Arms.
That's awesome.
I think he almost floated on a cloud out the door when he left. So he was pretty pleased with himself.
Rolling man, it's awesome Japanese dice.
He did.
Yes. I'm down for that. Well, one of the big things that you guys talked about, and you've mentioned it a couple times, but I think it's worth mentioning again. And I don't think we need to go through all the etiquette points here, but sportsmanship is absolutely essential to your philosophy in the creating and running of Codswallop. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your expectations were and how that actually played out on the day?
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to say to people was that we weren't going to be giving us sportsmen. I didn't want this to be a competition. So look, I'm being more sporting than him. I just want this to be part of the culture of the event. And we wanted people, given that we were trying to attract new players, and I've got to say, I think it was probably 40% of the players were new to the game, which was great. We had a bunch of people that couldn't make it. They were either new or returning. They hadn't played for a long time. They might have only played version 1. So I almost call those new players is that they're basically coming in.
Can you call David Xavier a new player, though?
Yeah, I know. He's a little different. He's a bit special, David. He is a little bit special.
5th or something, didn't he? Definitely not.
Yeah. He is not a new player, but everyone else was a returning player. And then we did. We had a number of players that messaged me and said, look, I've only played 2 games of version 1. Is it okay if I come? I don't know how I'm going to fit. And we wanted to make it really clear to people that everyone was welcome, and that the purpose of the day, sure, we want it to be competitive. We want people to play to try and win, but we can do that in a way that is like responsible adults and actually just enjoy ourselves. And sometimes the dice go your way and sometimes they don't. And that's the game, And we had people helping each other during the games, saying, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? Or at the end of the game, if I was you, I would have done, next time I'd play this. I heard people actually having the conversation afterwards. Help me out. Next time I play, how should I manage this? And I tried to, where possible, match people, not only historically in that first round, but try to look for people who would be able to help out with that approach. People that may have known each other from other spaces. Some of them just got lucky in that way. I just lucked out. Some of them I tried to get with someone senior I knew in our club that would be really good to guide someone along there. And then we just have a bit of a talk at the start of the event just to set down what the expectations are and that we're not playing for sheep stations. Everyone's going home with something really good. And we did have our sponsors, and we'll talk about them in a little while, but we did have some really generous sponsors that helped out. We had some wonderful prizes and people could see those up front. So I was to say that, there is no big, $300 pack of something for you to take home. That it's everyone's in here to play, and there were some trophies for the first, second, and third. There was the special dice for them, but at the end of the day, everyone got something.
Nice. Well, clearly for this point value, if we're rocking less than 500 points, if you were to put that on a 4x6 table, the table might look a little empty. And the games might actually take a little bit longer because you need to move around them. You narrowed the field. Now, this is something that we did a couple years ago here in Melbourne. And honestly, I can't remember how many points it was. I want to say 750 points is when we ran it. And we ran it at a 4x4 table, just like you did. And I think it was still too many points for a 4x4, but I think there was not enough points for a 4x6, if that makes sense. You dropped to a 4x4, and I think for your point value, I think it works really well. But that's from, Theory Hammer being the armchair general without actually putting boots on the table, so to speak. You've actually been there now. You've seen this in action. 32 players duking it out, and you play tested it beforehand. Do you think the 4x4 is a good point value or a good table size for that point value?
Let's ask Adrian. Let's start there. He played it. I just watched people play it. Adrian, your thoughts?
Yeah, 100%. If it had been, 6x4, it would have been way too big. I mean, your flanking maneuvers wouldn't have. I mean, you've only got 7 units on the dice, seven units on the board, and maybe only 2 or 3 of those are infantry units. So you really don't have a lot of teams to maneuver around with. It was we had to think a hell of a lot about every single point that we spent at that point value, and there was the special rules that were with this tournament. So the MMGs putting out the double pins, and the officers. As it turned out with the officers, I think I was a little bit kind of my inexperienced officer, but having a more experienced officer or even having a higher point officer really helps to keep. When you've got something like MMGs putting out auto pins, it's good to have officers around to keep your troops moving, and that's really important. Now, I ended up with an officer team that was veteran, and basically they were veteran, and they won me my draw because Ian was hell bent on knocking those guys off one of the objectives. So, and he just missed out. So it was a real close run thing, and it was just the fact that they were veteran, and I had to take them veteran because of the way my list was. So, yeah, I think there was a couple of scenarios there was one scenario especially, I think the one I played against Ian, where there was 5 objectives. And it was just for that amount of points with only 7 dice, I felt that it was too many. I had to have 2 units holding objectives, and that basically left me 1 unit to give it a red hot go to go and get anything. So, I mean, maybe if we'd played where you flip the objective like in Tank Wars, so once you've held it, it's yours until somebody else takes it. That would have probably that would have been one of the takeaways with the smaller table, because you just don't have the troops to hold a larger amount of objectives. But you don't want only 2 or 3 objectives either, because then it becomes a little bit, stale. Only having only having a couple of objectives and really only fighting over one. So
and you actually, I was going to say, Adrian, you bring up a really good point on that. So that mission that Adrian's talking about, I think, is Fog of War. It's one from the Bold Action Alliance. Brad, you might be familiar with that one. And
maybe.
Yeah, there we go. And I ummed and ahed about including that mission for the reason I wanted to put some different missions in there that, again, force people to think differently. And putting one with 5 objectives was really interesting because all of a sudden it opened that question of how many do I go for?
Yeah.
With 7 guys on the table, maximum 9, minimum 5, you've got to start thinking hard about what to do. And one guy, unfortunately, he bought LRDG and had the problem of not being able to hold objectives, which was interesting. So you've got to think about that when you're putting your list together. And he just didn't see that in the mission pack. He just missed the point in that. Having said that, his army looked very cool and was tenacious in defeats a couple of times, trying to hold on to objectives when he didn't have a lot of troops to take it. But that was one of the key things in thinking about those smaller tables was how do we do that? We had to modify a few things, and I think we had to think about sort of some of the measurements with the 4x4 tables. Some of the missions talk about having things that have to be 18 inches apart from each other. So, well, yeah, it's not going to quite work that way because we don't have all that space. And that was, I guess, key to play testing some of the missions beforehand. Was trying to get the chance to throw them on the table and see what they look like on a 4x4 table and try a few things, see that they didn't work, throw it out, put it back in again and trial it. So there was a bit of that thinking going on. But honestly, I think the 4x4 tables, I think worked really well. Gave people plenty of space on the side. Each table was set up with the 6x4 board, so therefore there was a 2-foot strip down the side for them to put their books and their dice and whatever it was they had there, plus the army going on in the battle, and any casualties that dropped off just got pushed to the side a little bit. So that was nice from that perspective.
Yeah, and the pictures I saw from the event had wonderful terrain too. So it wasn't, I know that sometimes when I've talked to people about smaller events with smaller tables, they've spoken as though the tables would be empty, which I always feel like is the opposite of what I'd expect. I'd expect if you had a smaller table that you would have more terrain. But having looked at pictures from your event, it seemed like there was a nice mix of density. That you didn't just have one type of table that was really light on terrain or really heavy and nothing in between. It seemed you had a spectrum that benefited different people's armies. So, people got a nice range of tactical opportunities on the tabletop when they were pushing their toy soldiers around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is for the guys that all build terrain. And Adrian's one of the guys that provided one of the tables for the day, and all of our members of the club that were able to chipped in and helped out with terrain where possible. And there's some beautiful boards there that they really take a lot of pride in what they do in putting that together, and that they try to think really hard about would they like to play on this table, because sometimes you see tables that look beautiful, and then when you go to play on it, you go, oh, this is actually really impractical to move my toy soldiers around.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to find that balance between those two things, I think, is important. You want people to walk in. It's one of the things I love about bolt action. You walk in around, when I walked around Moab, I went and visited Adrian and the boys playing at Moab. You walk around some of the tables on other game systems, and it doesn't look so great. You walk into the bolt action tables, and they look magnificent. And I think, there's some clubs around the place that do really well with terrain. Obviously the guys in Tasmania just love their terrain and they do a great job. Guys in Western Australia, we've seen some fantastic stuff there too. And that sort of got our guys going, all wanting to make sure that we were putting out good quality terrain as well. There was one of the tables that you brought up in the photos there, Brad. It got one of the prizes we gave away was the best terrain provided for the day. And so that Sicilian Italian looking table. You will see on there, and it's a little bit different. Just go back one. That one there.
That's it.
A little bit different in that it's got elevation in it.
Yes.
So there's a lot of tables tend not to do a lot with elevation. They put a lot of trees and bunkers and things. Whereas, and I had a couple of guys comment to me who'd been playing on this table on the day that this was really different for them, because they had to think about putting artillery on high places. All of a sudden they can see me in places that I didn't expect. Although those buildings are fairly tall as well, so could I hide behind the buildings and get around them? So that was really interesting for them. They found that challenging and different. And this is my son's board that he put together. He made all those hills, and this is one that he was particularly proud of. Again, it'll be making an appearance at CanCon next year, so it'll be in the full 6x4 format. It'll be slightly differently arranged, but this table was really different. But I think we had a lot of really beautiful tables. We had one that Adrian provided, which was half fields, half village, which was really nice. I don't know whether I provided the photo on that one. There was an industrial style one. There was a couple of winter boards. There was some desert stuff. So it was just a really good mix for people to get into. Some lovely Normandy stuff with some tanks that had been ruined, buried inside hedgerows and things like that as
awesome.
Cover. So it was very cool.
I haven't seen that before, actually. The tanks in the hedgerows as terrain.
Yeah, it's on one of the photos there. If you go back and have a look at it later, you'll see it.
That is a good idea. I'm going to go check that out. Well, let's talk for a second about the thing that I'm going to bring up, because as you mentioned, I do like to write a mission. Let's talk about the missions you ran on the day. And I'm not just actually asking because I know you ran one of mine. Besides Fog of War, What other missions did you run? You have mentioned that you modified the deployments for smaller point level and the smaller table size, but talk to us a little bit about the missions that you ran on the day.
Yeah, so mission 1 was straight out of the book. That was point defense, and it's one that you don't see a lot at tournaments. We wanted to have, when I was talking with a few different people, and this is what I try to do as I'm putting these things together. I try and get just a mixture of experienced players where I just throw ideas off them and just bounce things around. People probably don't even realize that I'm actually trying to source things for Codswallop, but just try to get ideas and what people's thoughts are. So with point defense, it was one that some people said to me, oh, I'd never run that at a tournament. I don't like it. It advantages I think the defender too much was the comments that I heard. But I wanted to have some attacker defender scenarios in there to allow people to bring, you want to benefit some people who bring things like the Italian army. They don't get a lot of love, and I wanted to see them get an opportunity out there. So we actually had a couple of missions that could do that, and point defense was one of those. On that one, that was one where we needed to adjust the distance that you could place the objectives apart, because the board just wasn't wide enough. So we had to look at that. Mission 2 was exactly out of the book, sectors. Everyone's favorite. It always gets a run at tournaments, and it's a fairly safe kind of mission to run, getting that maneuverability. The interesting thing with sectors this time is being able to get in and around the smaller board. The movement made it a little bit easier, being able to jump across those horizontal sectors, I guess, and easier to get around, get across the board there. So sectors was number 2, and number 3 was fog of war, and mission number 4 was supply drop, another Bolt Action Alliance mission, and that one was really interesting. The number of people that commented on that one, because it's that you don't know where the objectives are going to turn up in that game, and what was interesting, and this happened to me in playtest as well, was that that mission ended up with the randomness of the objectives, with them falling on top of units. So it was amazing the number of times that they landed right on top of a unit, and they were already, we got that. So that was an interesting one. I don't know what your experience with that one was, Adrian, the random objectives there.
I play tested that with Roy, and that was it's actually a lot of fun, even on the 4x4. It kind of worked. I mean, you looked at it and went, oh, well, it could be anywhere on the board, and it was. And I remember when we were playtesting it, we had units killed, and all sorts of stuff happening, and initially I was like, oh, it's I don't know about this, but it was a lot of fun, and that's the whole point. The whole point is having a hell of a lot of fun playing games. So, and that was the last game. I think I played that against Kenny, and look, that game was the only game that I came up against a medium machine gun, and he was doing the job of he's doing a pretty good job of pinning my veteran unit in a field, and basically they had to just get up and move 6 inches to get that objective, and I was lucky enough, because I was running veterans, to get those boys up and get them on the objective. But we'll talk about that when we talk about lists.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think I've talked about the supply drop as that seems to be the new hot mission that everyone mentions. And I know that not everyone may have heard the previous one, so I'll keep this short. If you played in the original Bolt Action Alliance 2016 or 2020 player pack, the mission that is universally either loved the most or hated the most is Kitty Hawk Down. And it seems to be the other mission that everyone loves is Heartbreak Ridge. So all the feedback, all the hate mail I got for Kitty Hawk Down, I took it on and thought about it for a long time, and then pulled the things that I really liked from Heartbreak Ridge and combined the two, so that you didn't have that one objective coming in and blowing things up that everyone seemed to hate. And also the fact that the objectives come off in symmetrically opposite directions. No one's ever disadvantaged because, an objective's going in towards both players. Now you don't know where on your half, but there is still an objective going on your half. And if for some weird reason the dice put it straight down the middle, well, both players get it equally. So yeah, it's fun. Anyway, I'm glad you guys enjoyed playing it. I know a lot of people seem to be playing that at the moment. And yeah, I look forward to putting out the formal version. Please send in your feedback. But let's talk.
Just on that one, Brad, before you jump off, that was another one that we had to adjust the distances for. So as to how far apart the things were going to fall.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. Before we get to lists, we do need to mention sponsors. Now, you did mention, Craig, that Warlord Games came to the table in a big way, and that's part of their new event support program, and they have come out swinging. I know for Operation Bear and for Jump to Action, they really brought the prizes, and I understand they did the same thing for Moab, and now they're doing the same thing for Codswallop. So that's really impressive to see. But of course, that is done through our friends and local distributors of Warlord Games, people who have been supporting the Warlord scene or the bolt action scene in Melbourne and Australia wide since it started. In fact, the very first time I bought any bolt action, including the rulebook, was from War and Peace Games, our good friends. I mean, how good are these guys?
War and Peace have been sponsors for all three Codswallops. They're the only sponsor we've had all the way through, and they've been very, very generous. They helped me out with getting things organised with Warlord, which was fantastic, and really did their level best to make sure that I had everything that I needed on the day. Offered some extra support when I chipped some extra the entry fees in to buy some extra things. They were gave to me a bit of discounts as well, so it was really, really generous of them. So between them and Warlord, that was one half of the sponsorship. We actually had two other sponsors. One of them didn't make it onto the players pack when I put it out, so I'll mention that one first. That's Eureka. A lot of people know Nick from down in Melbourne. Great guy, and puts out some beautiful sculpts.
Amazing.
So we got some gift vouchers from Eureka to help us out, and they were a new sponsor this year for us. And then the other guy that's helped us out is Andrew Carra from Warriors Den. He's been on for the last 2 years. Very, very generous supporter. And this year, one of the 32 competitors, he flew down from Brisbane to join us and presented some of the trophies on the day. So it was great to have him there. I've used Andrew a number of times for buying things after I learned about him through sponsorship of the event last year, and he's been immensely helpful in locating stuff that I wanted to get that I couldn't find anywhere in a store, and he was able to sort of get it for me and get it to me as soon as possible. So which has been fantastic as well. So I'd really talk up all of them. Adrian, you had something you wanted to add?
And there was one more sponsor that didn't get a mention either, unfortunately, and that's RKX Miniatures in the UK. They're a SDL business, and he allowed us to print a bit of a starter army for the Americans with their 105 howitzer. I think it was Jackson I did, and the what's happened? Am I still on?
Yeah, you're still with us, mate.
Yes, sir. You're on.
Sorry.
You're still with us.
And the HST, the M4 HST, so that was picked up and taken. And that was fantastic. I like
what our wooden spooner went home with.
Yeah. Yep. So it's about what was it, fourth or fifth off the table or something?
Yep,
so,
absolutely.
And that's and we did the same thing at Moab. We printed a bunch of stuff and put it together with Eureka miniatures for starter packs. And I think the Soviets were the first thing off the table.
Yep.
And then we had a Japanese pack, and that was the third thing off the table. So, some really fantastic prizes. Great sponsorship. And Warlord coming to the party. It's just been amazing. The last two events that I've been to, I mean, I've just, looked at the tables and gone, this is crazy. I think Ian added it up. There was something like $1,600 worth of prizes at Moab. Oh, but between 24 people. I mean, it's crazy, the prize support. It's just fantastic.
It's outstanding stuff.
The problem I've got is that I've just got too much stuff already. So it's like I can't take anything off the table. I can't put it into my pile of shame.
Yeah.
A pile of opportunity, I think, is what they call it these days, just to feel better about yourself. Going into Christmas, just call it a pile of opportunity, okay? Just make us all feel better.
I did get one of those piles of opportunity together for Codswallop, so that was, that was a good thing.
Nice.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so I mean, I can't thank those sponsors enough. All coming to the party, and all through, as I said, War and Peace have been there from day one through COVID, and they're tough times, and for them and for Warriors Den, I'm sure they're all doing it tough during that time with businesses not being able to operate as they normally would, and to be able to sponsor us in the ways that they have has made the event possible, and it makes people want to, when they go home for their $30, they're going home with something that's quite possibly worth more than the $30 they paid for. And they just, I mean, honestly, people were so happy walking out the door saying that it was one of the best events they've been to. They just all went home with something. They got a good feed, had a great time, some laughs with people. It's what you want.
It is. It is. Well, Codswallop was an overwhelming success. From having heard from players, having heard from you guys, what a time. But let's shift gears a little bit and to talk about smaller point games in general. Now, when we ran the 750 point-ish 4x4 tables, one of the big takeaways that we saw was all of a sudden, and we did limit the armor just like you guys did, but one of the things that we did or we noticed was tanks were very important on those tables. I think it's because we were using bigger points, and assault units became paramount. I think because people had the extra points beyond the 489 that you guys were running, there was a lot of SMG troops because the boards are smaller. There were more troop squads, and those troop squads were armed to bear. And the people who brought particularly assault heavy armies did very well. Now, that was a long time ago. And again, that was a much larger point value than you were running. If I was to run on a 4x4 table, again, I would probably run 500 points as well. Do you have any hot takes that you have as a takeaway? Adrian, why don't I start with you as a player who was on the table? Any big takeaways, recommendations for people who might be looking to run a small event or even just a fun casual game with their friends on a smaller table?
Tanks and armored cars, closed tanks and armored cars, because you want them to be effective, so you don't want them to be pinned by or even assaulted by infantry. I mean, don't forget, infantry can still assault vehicles, especially if they're open top, destroy them quite easily without anti-tank grenades. So, Ian Underwood's force was probably the toughest one I came up against, and he was running a M1311 or whatever is the Italian tank with the light gun in the hull and the twin machine guns on the turret, and a ZM, the World War One vintage armored car, and he got those right up in my face, and he was kicking my ass with them. I had to throw one of my squads of infantry at him in a vain hope that they'll get some hits and put them out of action or at least immobilize them. But alas, that didn't quite work. But that was one of the big takeaways. The tanks were very effective. Very effective in that point size. You're limited by your anti-tank. I mean, are you going to take anti-tank? And my decision was no, because it's not going to get the points back. I'm not going to take a tank that is going to be at other tanks and can't do a good job against infantry. And I'm not going to take, something like a bazooka for 60 points or a Panzerfaust or they're 80 points. There's no way I'm taking something like that just in case. I'm better off to ignore those tanks. And if I'm where I want to be, just go down. So,
absolutely. Well, that Italian tank you mentioned earlier is a beautiful tank for that because it's got the light AT gun and it's got the machine gun. So it is horrifically efficient against infantry squads. But if you do run into a tank or an armored vehicle in a smaller point value game where there's the 8+ armor rule, people are likely to be taking lighter things. Light AT gun, all of a sudden, very effective. So, and it's cheap.
Yeah. Very effective, but still 50 points for regular. Really? I don't know. You got to, if you're taking that away from one of your infantry units, then, you're not going to have enough. And this is the problem that Ian ran into. He only had 2 infantry units and they were both inexperienced. And by the end of the game, he only had 1 while, I still had all mine. So, it was.
To be fair, I was talking about more the AT gun on the tank rather than outside of the tank shooting, but still, I mean, I am the guy who ran a light AT gun in his DAC list at Moab for years, so I can't talk, but that was 1,000 points, not 500. So I will come back to you, Adrian, but Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, it was interesting. The comment that I think overwhelmingly came back to me as people were playtesting their lists in the lead up to the event was that at 489 points, you had to think really hard about what you were going to do with your units because you didn't have that reserve force that was sitting back waiting for something else to go wrong and jump in. So people thought really hard about how they were going to preserve their units. And our scoring system that we went with this time around, we tried to say to people, we want you to value that. So instead of previously we'd run an event that looked at rewarding kills. The more of your enemy you killed, the better you did in your games. In this one, we actually had it. The more you actually looked after your guys and still managed to get a victory or not was the thing that got you through. And so people did report back that was one of the things they found really interesting was it made some really tough decisions on, do I really want to commit this squad of 6 guys? Because if I put them out there, we could be in a bit of strife. And I haven't got anyone else to be able to pick up that objective. And particularly on those missions where you've got the 5 objectives, that became really, really difficult for people. So I think that was one interesting thing. A couple of interesting meta things that happened during it's funny how these things swing around. Is a lot of people, there was a number of cavalry units getting out there. I think, Adrian, you had one with your polls.
I would not run a course without it now. I love it.
Yeah, I saw you bring them on in an out. I think in the final game, I think you came in with a flanking maneuver.
Won me the game. I think they won every game for me, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah. There was one guy who, and he won the Hannah-Swag Award. He bought Australians on camels. From Egypt.
So good. Yep. So early war Brits. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was very cool. And so we saw a bit of cavalry getting out there. The other thing we saw was autocannons. A lot of autocannons on trucks, autocannons just sitting on the table. So we saw a lot of those out there, which really proved interesting for people. It just the meta changed entirely, where people started thinking about things, and it was interesting in the lead up for these small games, and with that MMG rule that we launched. One of the things was that people were thinking really hard about, someone's surely going to bring that, American MMG platoon that's just filled with MMGs, and what are you going to do? And no one did. No one bought anything like that, because at that point level, they realised that, well, they were good for throwing out pins, but heaven forbid actually being able to do anything with them in terms of, you've got to make them manoeuvrable and be able to actually capture objectives and assault things.
They're still MMGs. They've got a fixed arc, and they can't move and shoot. And snipers can take them out. They're even throwing out a free pin. They're still pretty useless.
Yeah.
Sorry, all you MMG lovers.
I actually played a game against Patch last week. Spoilers. I did pull out a MMG in a Japanese list, and I did pin down one of his big infantry squads just by throwing out, a pin at the end of the turn, pin at the beginning of the turn, put 2 pins on him. They failed their test, went down. And then at the beginning of the next turn, hit him again, went down again. I was like, yep, keep it going. And then he rallied, and then I hit him again, and then I hit him again. And it was just one MMG with one squad occasionally throwing a couple shots over to add to the pins. But that 50-point MMG, baby, and it was sitting on an objective at the same time. It did everything it had to do. Best 50 points ever.
Absolutely. So it's interesting they're playing those smaller games. I think those sort of the considerations. There was a couple of other things that I thought were interesting after the first round, and this is something that we changed mid-tournament for people. First game, prep bombardment, and it was really devastating for at 489 points if it went bad for you. And so the recommendation we came from mission 2 onwards was if there was a prep bombardment, discuss whether you actually want to do it as players. The challenge that I didn't want to totally ban it was that anyone that had bought a British list don't get one of their key advantages that they have for bringing their British. So I didn't want to totally ban it. So it had to be a discussion between the players. If they couldn't agree, it's as the rules in that mission. I think there was only 2 that had the prep bombardment anyway. But that was a discussion that got raised. So I'd encourage anyone, if you're doing something at that point level, think about that kind of thing that could be devastating, because you don't have, it's not like 1,000 points where you've got 12, 13, 14 dice lists on the table. You got 5, you got 6, you got 7. Average was 7. And so that makes you think really differently about the way you do things. And when you're 7, one of them is the officer. And then you might have a vehicle, all of a sudden you're down to, 4 possibly units that can capture an objective. It changes your thinking. So just encouraging people to think around that. But look, I'd encourage people to experiment. Get in, have a go at a small game. I mean, doing it at your club, I think, is a fantastic way to give people that opportunity to come in. And at Western Front Gamers, it's one of the things we're really keen on is trying to welcome people into the club, give them a good experience. They want to turn up and try bolt action for the first time. We're going to give them an Adrian to play against who's going to sit there and help them, that is talk through the game with them and work through them. I mentioned Alex before. He's been with us for a number of years, and he just loves turning up and playing. And he doesn't win it very often, but he loves the game, and he loves the thinking through what he's got to try and do. Yeah, it's fantastic. And we've got a lot of great guys. You might know Brian Medbury. I don't know whether you know Brian. Brian's one of the he and Ian, I'd have to say, are 2 of the gentlemen of the game in our club as well. And so we're really privileged to have guys like that you can just, they just stand beside someone and help them play, help them learn the game, which I think is just fantastic.
One of the things that we saw when we were running the smaller size was, and I think it had to do with the proliferation of assault units, was there were a lot of trucks with machine guns. Because the machine gun is super efficient on a truck. It's cheaper than the medium machine gun team, as Adrian pointed out earlier. And it is mobile. It allows you to get where you need to go, and you can deliver those assault units where they want to go. What you even see more of are either the Japanese light trucks, or, which is the same profile, the ever-present Dodge Beep, the half truck, the eight capacity half-size truck. So those definitely made a huge appearance at our previous event. And again, I think had you dropped down to 500 points rather than 750, you would have seen a lot fewer of those. But because you were limiting points, it led to people going, well, instead of taking armored vehicles, well, I'm going to take soft skin vehicles because they're cheaper. But then I'm going to take the same old infantry I always do. And they may have had a few fewer toys as far as howitzers and whatnot, other things, and gone for maybe a slightly cheaper option, maybe a light howitzer instead of a medium, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, the soft skins were out in force. And at the time, that wasn't a meta thing as bad. However, now, given that they're seen all over the place, and we have tournaments like CanCon significantly changing the rules of the game, to try and combat their, ever presence on the tabletop, I think that might be something to consider if you are planning an event or a game. You might see some soft skins. So, Adrian, anything you want to add to either what I've said or to what Craig said, or just general thoughts about things to consider when playing smaller point games?
I don't know. I didn't see any soft skins actually. I didn't see a single truck with the MMG. At 489. I don't know. Yeah, trucks weren't even on my radar at that sort of level. And I'm not sure, Craig. I mean, you had all the lists. Did you have many trucks come through? I didn't.
There were a few. There was one. Julian brought one. I think that had a. It didn't have the MMG, or might have had the MMG as well, but I remember it had like a light autocannon on the back, which was cool. So there's a bit of that going on. But there were a few trucks.
That was a heavy autocannon.
It was a heavy autocannon, was it? Yeah. There were a few, but not many, I don't think.
I think you would see that far more at 750 or 900, for example, if going to Moab. I mean, there would have been a lot of trucks, at least from having seen pictures. I noticed
there were a lot of trucks, yeah.
There was. So, I think, as you said, if you drop down to 500-ish points, that's really going to drop off, where people really then focus on the things that they need to have, like infantry squads and an officer, right? Yeah. Anything else, Adrian?
About trucks?
In general.
At the lower points?
Yeah.
Look, I mean, I'll talk about my list and how I put it together.
Yeah, please do.
At 489 points, there was a couple of major considerations in this tournament, and the first one was the auto pin with the MMG. You don't want to be taking inexperienced or even regular guys if you're going to be expecting extra pins. So you need to first up with the officer. Your officer really needed to do his job, and that was help drop pins, but also needed to, if he could, put out a pin. So I had my officer. He was veteran because I had to, and he had an assistant who was had a rifle, so he could put out a pin at 24 inches, and that was their job. Now, I'm not sure whether they did it very often, but they gave it a red hot go. Actually, those two guys, because I ran polls and they were fanatic. In my second game, they assaulted a Mum and Herring or something. The same tank that I had with the twin turret MMGs. The Armour 7 with the soft sides. Those two guys got in there and assaulted one of those, and I think they disabled it. They broke the tracks or whatever they did with their just because they were fanatics, they could just get in there. So because I was thinking, what am I going to do with this fanatic on these Polish? But that was great. That worked really well. And so obviously Polish, you're not going to run Poles without any Lancers. I didn't play against him, but there was a guy at CanCon last year who ran a strong Polish Lancer army, but I sort of always felt that just having the cavalry, you were going to be a bit limited. There's a few tactics that you can do, or if it's open ground or anything like that, you're in trouble. You've got to get up there. So I took 6 veteran Lancers, 6 veteran armored, the armor corps guys. The trouble with Poles is that the minimum squad size is 10.
Yeah.
And that's just too many. So, but I think with the armored troops, I think it's 4 or 5, like standard sort of squad size. Yeah, 5. So I took one of those guys veteran, and I took one of those and another squad of 6 as regular. So that's 4 dice. And I had to, because I was expecting an MMG in every list, I had to take a sniper. And so I also, so the Poles get the marksman. So he was a single guy and he was a bit cheaper. So he was 10 points. Sorry, 10 points cheaper than a sniper. And that actually put my assistant with the officer. So that was my 5th dice. And then I ran the little tankette with the 20mm autocannon. That was my most expensive. No, it wasn't my most expensive unit. I think that Lancers were. But that was like 90 points. And I undernard with that because it was so many points for autocannon on a 7+ enclosed vehicle. But I needed some anti-tank. Otherwise, other people's tanks were just going to roll right over me. Absolutely roll right over me. So I put that in, and that was pretty cheap. But the Poles get I can't remember what is that British thing that they built with the twin turrets, twin MMG turrets, and that works out regular at 45 points. And so between that and the Lancers, it's just those two units are just at 489 points. These are great units. So
Adrian was working really hard to get those Poles ready for the list. He had his Japanese force as his backup. He was one of the guys that submitted 2 lists to me and said, "This is the one I'm painting. This is the one I'm got if as my backup if I don't get there." And I was glad he got there with the Poles because they were pretty popular. A lot of people really liked them. Dave Xavier, of course, big fan of his Polish.
He loves the Poles.
He does.
Yeah, I play tested both those armies only once, but the Poles with the veteran infantry were just so more solid. Take their pins, they're still able to move, still able to do what they need to do. And bolt action is a game of movement. And if you want to win bolt action, you guys got to be moving. You're not going to win by sitting back and shooting. Nobody wins BA sitting back and shooting. You win BA by getting in there, smacking people around with your Polish Lancers or your Japanese cavalry who are fanatics, tough fighter. I mean, it's the only way to win, quite frankly. I think, you've got to get in there, get in people's faces. That and heavy howitzers.
Nice.
Heavy howitzers at 489 points.
No, not at 489 points.
No, I know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
At 1,000 points. And that was one of the things we did at Moab as well. When you look at the rules on basing guns, it says it's got to be within 2 inches, right, of the
breach.
Of the breach. So that's pretty much a massive 4-inch circle around it. So even if you're hit by a heavy howitzer, you're only going to lose. Let's take the Japanese heavy howitzer with 7 or 8 crew, or is it even 9? It's at least 8.
I think it's 8.
Yep, the 88 with 7. You're only going to kill 3 guys, even with a heavy howitzer hit. And you take one of those veteran, you just keep them pumping out the shots, even if they've got stuff raining down on them. Well, that stuff's not raining down on your infantry, which are really doing. They're the ones doing all the work. So what we did at Moab was we made this template, and I don't know whether anybody actually ended up using it, but it was like you can base your guns however you want, and you can take your hits on those bases as well. But if you want to, this is the legal. This is the largest legal amount that you can spread your guys out, and you can have the hits on this template if you want. That's one of the rules of the game to try and. That was partly to try and encourage people, to take guns, to go. It's more survivable than just crowding all the guys around the breach and losing it to a medium border, second turn. That's why you don't see a lot of guns. But with them spaced out properly. I think when I went to CanCon last year with a veteran heavy howitzer with my Japanese, I think I lost it once in 5 games, or did I even lose it? Got
It's
pinned
so
out.
good.
But yeah, they're great. They're super duper weapons. So
And as someone who's run a heavy howitzer in a Japanese list myself, I just say, heaven forbid you charge them with a squad that's been, beaten up a little bit on the way in. My guys are standing there with their shovels saying, we're fanatic, we're here, and there's a
we're
lot of us. Come
yeah,
at me, bro.
come at me.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, even those flanking guys are they're going to stop taking out your howitzer. So
Yeah, because Cartapaccio squads are so expensive that if you charge in, they're gonna have a bunch. Yeah, they'll probably kill a couple guys for shooting, but gun shield / whatever else. And then you go, well, I still got a bunch of guys here. Come at me. Yep, I'm waiting for you. So yeah, it's a good time. It's a very good time.
yeah, well, I think the only other thing that sort of comes on from the back is the Italians with their Dubats. The theatre selector out of, I think it's Jewel in the Sun.
I think it is Duel. It's Duel in the Sun or Western Desert. I think it's Duel in the Sun. Yeah.
No, it's Jewel in the Sun. Yeah, it's not Western Desert. It's one of those ones where you can take the native troops as regular, and you can take Dubats who come in from the back edge, and everybody's got to be irregular natives except for one squad of Italians. They'll come on the back as well, but yeah, they wouldn't stand much of a chance against Japanese heavy howitzer either.
No, they wouldn't. Well, gentlemen, I think our time is sadly coming to a close. Adrian, great thoughts. Craig, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, look, the only thing I would say that just talking specifically about running events and things is if you really want to try and connect with people, you've got to give people the opportunity to connect with each other during the event. And one of the things that I really don't like when I go to big events is you rush from game to game to game, go and get something to eat, go to the bathroom. You don't really get a chance to actually connect with people. And one of the things we really tried to do, we've done it every year, is we've put lunch on or dinner in this case this year. Play a couple of games and then give people time to go and stand outside and talk and connect. And I think that's a great way to have people really feel like they've been to a great social event, rather than it just be about, my feet are killing me from standing on them for X number of hours playing through games. And reality is, we had 4 games at 90 minutes each, but we had a big break in between game 3 and 4 so that people could go outside, have a drink, have something to eat, and just talk. And it was fantastic, just hearing the conversations going. It was almost like trying to drag people away from those conversations to go back into play the last game was a challenge. And I think when people are thinking about running events, consider doing that sort of stuff where you give people that opportunity to connect and be a bit real with each other. We're a great community in Bold Action, and I think that makes the difference when they're not feeling like they're just being shoved from table to table to table and, oh, well, I lost, I'll go home now. But it's, I got to talk to some great guys over lunch about what's going on in their lives, jobs, the games they've played that they lost on a bad die roll. Anything was on the table, and it was just great to connect with people. So I think that'd be the only other thing I'd say, considering across just generally running events, is consider how you want that to be. And I know that's not always possible, but really think about how you might want to do that. And don't be frightened to mix things up a bit. Try it out. We try something different in Codswallop each year, and I think it's important to try and keep the game effectively being a great community building, a great connection for people, and that's what we want. So I won't give anyone BA tactical advice because basically I'm rubbish. So that's a good reason why I like to TO is I couldn't roll a dice to save my life.
I think all of those objectives that you've stated there, Craig. I mean, they were all massively achieved with Codswallop this year. It was it was the best event I've ever been to. It was just it was random. It was pretty random. that I won. But the whole event in itself was just fantastic.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm glad
and
you enjoyed it.
yeah,
Yeah, man, it is so glad to. I'm so glad to hear that fun events are being run everywhere in Australia. Across in Western Australia, we're hearing things, wonderful events being run by different clubs. In Sydney, different groups running different style events are happening. Obviously, CanCon / WinterCon, the wonderful events that are happening in Canberra. Melbourne's got a nice spread, and there's a lot of talk of some great events happening next year. It's just a wonderful time to be a bolt action player in Australia. I mean, obviously, I'm not even mentioning Tasmania and other places that are having events. Brisbane, Queensland, all sorts of great stuff happening. Guys, if you are listening to this and you have not been to an event in your local area and you are in the greater Australian area, or even if you're not, take a look on the Warlord website. Take a look at some of the event listings. Ask around on your local bolt action page, be it Australia, New Zealand, be it wherever else. Find some of those events that are happening, because you can find people who are playing the game the way that you want and the way that you like, be it competitive or casual or narrative based or whatever else. And in my case, I've made some of my best friends through these games, and it is a wonderful opportunity for you to go do that. Gentlemen, to both of you, thank you for running wonderful events this year. And I'm hoping to get to one of them next year. So please don't stop running them. I'm looking forward to some more great bolt actioning happening in 2023. Folks, thank you very much for listening to Cast Dice. It is always a pleasure to talk bolt action on the show. And I know there's been a lot of feedback in the last couple of weeks saying, where's my bolt action? Well, if you listen to the intro to Cast Dice, we do say we talk about a lot of games here. So yes, we are going to be doing that quite a lot in 2023. But yes, there is still going to be a ton of great content coming at you in 2023 from Bolt Action. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on. And folks, thank you very much at home for listening to Bolt Action on Cast Dice. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Graham.
As our good buddy Casey always says, when you are playing the games that we know and love, I hope your dice roll hot. I hope your beverages are cold. But more than that, we at Cast Dice hope that you are having fun. Stay safe out there, guys. Good night.